For years, the palace treated Meghan's brief appearance at Highgrove as an insignificant private encounter. But according to Tom Bauer, those 47 minutes contained a warning, a rejected offer, and one deeply personal exchange that changed Charles's understanding of Meghan forever. The official version, if it could even be called a version, was deliberately empty. Meghan had visited. Charles had received her. A private family conversation had taken place. Nothing more needed to be said. Yet Bauer's account suggested the silence was not protecting an ordinary meeting. It was protecting a moment of deep royal tension, arranged when trust between the Sussexes and the palace had already begun to collapse. Highgrove was not simply another royal residence. For Charles, it represented privacy, control, and the world he had carefully built away from the machinery of court. It held his routines, his memories, and his personal vision of what royal life should mean. Inviting Meghan there carried a message of its own. This was not neutral ground. She was entering Charles's private territory, where the father and the future king could no longer be separated. The meeting was kept unusually small. There were no cameras waiting outside, no public schedule, and no carefully worded announcement prepared in advance. Only a few aides reportedly understood why Meghan had been asked to come. Even fewer knew what Charles intended to place before her. She was expected to remain longer. Instead, the conversation ended after exactly 47 minutes. That detail immediately unsettled those waiting nearby. Royal meetings rarely ended by accident, especially when they concerned family, reputation, and the future of the monarchy. 47 minutes suggested that something had been cut short. Either a decision had been reached with brutal speed, or the discussion had broken down before either side was ready. Meghan arrived calm, but not relaxed. She reportedly understood that Charles had not summoned her merely to exchange polite words or repair appearances. Harry was connected to the circumstances surrounding the visit, yet he was not present for every part of the private conversation. Without him between them, there was no one to soften Charles's warnings or restrain Meghan's questions. The stakes were larger than one family disagreement. Charles wanted to know whether Meghan still intended to maintain any controlled relationship with the crown. Meghan wanted answers about security, status, public protection, financial independence, and how much influence palace officials still believed they could exercise over her life. Neither had come to surrender. Charles believed he was defending continuity. Meghan believed she was defending Harry, their children, and her right to shape her own identity without royal permission. Waiting inside was a carefully prepared proposal, one Charles believed could prevent a final rupture. The opening minutes remained controlled, almost courteous. Then Charles delivered one measured sentence, and the atmosphere changed completely. And as the doors closed behind them, Meghan realized this was not an invitation to rebuild trust, it was a final attempt to define exactly how much of her future the monarchy still intended to control. Charles began with warmth, speaking of family, duty, and the need to protect Archie and Lilibet from a lifetime of royal conflict. But beneath his measured language was an offer so carefully restricted that Meghan reportedly recognized it immediately not as reconciliation, but containment. He did not begin as a king. He began as a father. Charles spoke of the damage caused by public division, the exhaustion of constant conflict, and the danger of allowing resentment to harden into something permanent. He allegedly said the children should not grow up carrying battles they had never chosen. For a few moments, the language sounded personal, almost vulnerable. But then, the proposal appeared, and the warmth began to feel strategic. The offer was presented as a path back, but only part of the way. Meghan and Harry could attend selected family occasions. They could appear at certain ceremonies. Access to royal residences might be granted under agreed conditions. Yet there would be no automatic return to official duties, no freedom to define their own role, and no blending of royal appearances with commercial projects. Meghan listened without interrupting. Then she began examining the words: discretion, coordination, approval, family confidence. Each term sounded polite, but together they formed a structure of control. Palace officials would know where the Sussexes were going, what they intended to say, and how their presence might be used. Meghan reportedly believed the monarchy wanted the value of their attendance without offering the independence, protection, or institutional support that should come with it. Then, Charles raised the subject of titles. He did not threaten her directly. He did not say anything would be removed. Instead, he warned that royal status could not be separated forever from restraint, responsibility, and loyalty to the institution. Meghan immediately challenged the imbalance. Other royals, she argued, had maintained titles while pursuing private interests, financial opportunities, and public platforms. Why were Harry and Meghan judged by harsher rules? Charles was caught between two fears. He wanted them close enough to prevent further damage, but not free enough to speak with royal authority while operating beyond palace control. The discussion then moved to inheritance. Charles reportedly explained the difference between personal family possessions, crown property, historic objects, and items held for future generations. Meghan heard something darker beneath the explanation, a warning about what Archie and Lilibet might one day be allowed to access. Then came Diana. Charles allegedly invoked her not as an attack, but as a caution about private suffering becoming public warfare. Meghan's tone changed at once. To her, Harry's grief was being used as leverage, another emotional pressure point designed to force acceptance of conditions they had already resisted. She leaned into the real question. Had Charles created this proposal himself? Or had William and senior palace advisors already shaped every limit before she arrived? Charles's hesitation lasted only a moment, but to Meghan it revealed everything, and what she said next turned a guarded family discussion into a confrontation over loyalty, inheritance, and the future power of the Sussex name. Meghan had entered Highgrove prepared to discuss peace, but she now believed the future had already been decided without her. Her questions became sharper, Charles grew more defensive, and the conversation moved toward the one subject neither side could discuss without exposing old wounds: William. To Meghan, Charles's hesitation was not uncertainty. It was confirmation. Even if William had not personally written the proposal, his position had shaped its boundaries. She pressed Charles directly. Would the Prince of Wales now influence whether Harry and Meghan attended memorials, ceremonies, private gatherings, or future royal initiatives? Would every attempt at reconciliation eventually pass through William's judgment? Charles tried to draw a line between family emotion and royal reality. William was no longer simply Harry's brother, he allegedly explained. His responsibilities were expanding, and his opinion could not be separated from the future stability of the crown. But to Meghan, that answer exposed a dangerous arrangement. Harry's relationship with his father would increasingly depend on the approval of the brother with whom he still carried years of anger, suspicion, and unresolved pain. Then, Catherine's name entered the conversation without being spoken as an accusation. Meghan reportedly asked whether decisions about access, appearances, and family unity were also being shaped around Catherine's comfort and public standing. Charles rejected the idea that the conflict could be reduced to rivalry between two women. The monarchy, he argued, could not survive if every private disagreement became a public battle between competing households. Meghan answered with the accusation the palace feared most. Whenever a decision protected certain royals, it was called institutional. Whenever it isolated Harry and Meghan, they were told it was necessary. She was not asking only for ceremonial importance. She wanted written clarity. Would security be provided? Would invitations be genuine or symbolic? What position would Archie and Lilibet hold? Were the Sussexes still family? or were they now treated as a reputational danger to be managed from a distance? That question led into one of the monarchy's oldest unspoken rules. Blood alone did not guarantee access. Private residences, archives, heirlooms, ceremonial objects, and family treasures were often connected to service, trust, and closeness to the sovereign. Nothing had to be publicly denied. Doors could simply stop opening. Meghan challenged the fairness of a system built on rules no outsider could see. Those hidden traditions could decide who received protection, visibility, historic possessions, and a permanent place in royal memory. Charles's tone reportedly cooled when Meghan suggested that Archie and Lilibet could lose part of their heritage because their parents refused palace control. He denied that the children were being punished. But inheritance inside the monarchy, he warned, was never as simple as personal entitlement. Then, Charles referred to Meghan's private request, involving Highgrove, future family access, and an object connected to Diana. In that instant, Meghan understood why he had insisted on answering her face-to-face. What followed was the true reason the meeting lasted only 47 minutes, and according to Tom Bower, it was the part of the Highgrove visit the palace was most determined to keep buried. According to Bower's account, the meeting did not collapse over etiquette or a single angry remark. It broke apart when Charles rejected Meghan's private request, presented his final conditions, and warned that Harry's connection to the crown could not survive another public act of betrayal. The first 10 minutes were restrained. Charles spoke about Harry with concern rather than anger, insisting that private communication had to replace interviews, accusations, and carefully timed revelations. Meghan listened, but the calm was fragile. Both knew the conversation had moved beyond family pain. It was now about control. Charles then presented the proposed path forward. Meghan and Harry could attend selected family occasions, but there would be no automatic return to working royal life. Their appearances would require advance coordination, and royal events could not be independently connected to documentaries, commercial projects, or public campaigns. To Charles, these were protections. To Meghan, they were restrictions designed to make the Sussexes useful without making them equal. She reportedly challenged the offer directly. Why should they appear when the monarchy needed unity while remaining excluded from real influence, institutional protection, and decisions affecting their own future? Then, Meghan raised the request Charles had brought her there to answer. She allegedly wanted assurance that Highgrove, or a private part of it, could remain available for occasional family visits. Archie and Lilibet, she argued, deserved to experience Harry's heritage without cameras, official ceremonies, or palace supervision. She also reportedly asked about a personal item, private correspondence, or symbolic object linked to Diana that might one day pass to Harry's children. Charles refused. Highgrove, he allegedly said, could not become an informal Sussex base. Nor could historically sensitive possessions be promised while trust remained broken. Behind that refusal was a deeper fear. Private access might later appear in a memoir, documentary, interview, or commercial production beyond royal control. Meghan did not shout. Her reaction was colder. She reportedly accused the institution of treating her family's emotional history like protected property while still demanding loyalty from Harry. The monarchy, she suggested, controlled the homes, objects, archives, and public narrative, then questioned why he felt shut out. Charles's response was severe. Another public attack involving Camilla, William, Catherine, palace employees, or private conversations could close doors that were still barely open. Then came the sentence that destroyed the remaining warmth. Charles allegedly told Meghan that affection could not exist without confidence, and confidence had been repeatedly broken. Meghan answered that trust had failed on both sides, but only one side possessed the power to influence headlines, restrict access, and present silence as dignity. As the meeting approached its scheduled end, An aide signaled from outside. It no longer mattered. Meghan stood before Charles formally concluded the conversation. She had rejected the proposal, received no assurance about Highgrove, and secured no promise regarding Diana's legacy. Charles did not stop her. He offered only one final message for Harry. Whatever happened next must remain private, because another public confrontation would permanently alter the family relationship. At exactly 47 minutes, Meghan left, declining further hospitality. The visit had been a failed negotiation over royal return, family inheritance, Diana's memory, and the price of confidentiality. But Meghan's departure was only the visible ending. Within minutes, two competing versions of the meeting began moving through separate royal households, and Harry was about to hear words that would deepen the conflict even further. When Meghan told Harry what Charles had said, the meeting no longer sounded like a father seeking peace. To Harry, it sounded like the monarchy had placed his wife, his children, and his mother's legacy behind a locked door and demanded silence as the price of entry. Meghan recounted the conversation carefully. She described the restricted appearances, the demand for advance coordination, Charles's refusal to let Highgrove become a private family base, and the warning that further public revelations could permanently close the remaining doors. Yet Harry barely focused on the proposed royal arrangement. One detail consumed him, the suggestion that Archie and Lilibet's connection to their heritage might depend on the behavior of their parents. To Harry, that was not caution. It was pressure. Diana's memory had always occupied a painful place inside royal life. She was celebrated in speeches, remembered through ceremonies, and preserved as part of the monarchy's public history. But the private letters, possessions, and emotional meaning connected to her remained surrounded by rules. Harry reportedly believed her legacy was honored when it strengthened the institution, yet restricted when he sought to claim it as a son. Charles's language about trust only deepened his anger. From Harry's perspective, confidence had never been demanded equally. Damaging stories about Meghan had appeared again and again, while palace officials denied briefing against members of the family. Now the Sussexes were being warned about confidentiality by the same system Harry believed had failed to protect them. Meghan understood where his anger might lead. She allegedly urged him not to call Charles immediately. A furious response, however justified it felt, could be recorded, repeated, or used as proof that private communication with the Sussexes was impossible. Harry was trapped between two identities. One was the son who still wanted his father to offer reassurance without conditions. The other was the husband who refused to let Meghan face royal pressure alone. Neither side of him could remain silent, yet every possible response carried danger. A written reply was reportedly discussed. It demanded clarity about security, invitations, titles, the children's access to royal spaces, Diana-related possessions, and who held final authority over future family contact. But advisors warned that a letter could be leaked or selectively quoted. A private appeal might be presented as a formal challenge to the sovereign. Meghan began wondering whether the visit had ever been a genuine negotiation. Perhaps it had been a test, an attempt to discover what she would accept, what she would reject, and what she might later reveal. Harry's suspicion soon turned toward William. He allegedly believed his brother already knew the terms Charles intended to offer, making the meeting feel like part of a wider transfer of influence toward William's future court. That possibility made Highgrove's role even more painful. Harry had hoped his father's private refuge could remain outside the harshest institutional struggles. Instead, even that place now seemed governed by strategy. The exact 47 minutes became significant. To Harry, the timing suggested the conversation had been controlled from beginning to end. When Charles learned of his fury, palace concerns spread quickly. The encounter could no longer remain a private disagreement. Every household began preparing its own account. As Harry considered his response, Charles's advisors moved first, quietly reconstructing every minute of the visit before Meghan or Tom Bower could expose a version the palace might never be able to control. Before the public knew Meghan had entered Highgrove, royal aides were allegedly debating how the encounter should be remembered. Some wanted complete silence. Others wanted a harmless family explanation prepared in advance. But one advisor warned that 47 undocumented minutes could become a devastating weapon. The first concern was not what had been said. It was who knew. Which staff members had witnessed Meghan arrive? Who had seen her leave so quickly? Was there a written agenda, a security record, or any private note revealing why Charles had requested the meeting? Every small detail now carried risk, because even a simple timetable could expose how carefully the encounter had been arranged. Charles's household reportedly wanted the entire matter protected as a private family conversation. Official acknowledgement would invite questions no one wanted to answer. What had Charles offered? What had Meghan rejected? Why had a meeting expected to last longer ended after precisely 47 minutes? Other advisors believed silence was more dangerous. They preferred a controlled explanation, describing the visit as warm, informal, and focused on reconciliation. But that version created its own trap. Meghan had allegedly left without accepting the proposal. If the palace described the meeting as successful, any future disclosure could make Charles's household appear misleading. The disagreement exposed a deeper divide. Older courtiers believed dignity depended on saying nothing. Communications officials feared that silence would allow Harry and Meghan to define the encounter first. William's household reportedly sought immediate clarity. Had Charles promised future appearances, access to royal properties, protection of titles, Diana-related possessions, or special arrangements for Archie and Lilibet? William's advisors wanted to know whether one emotional conversation had created obligations that could later affect his own court. For Charles, the situation became increasingly painful. What he may have intended as a conversation between father and daughter-in-law was being pulled apart by lawyers, aides, and rival households. Every expression of affection now carried constitutional meaning. Every promise created financial and reputational consequences. Camilla allegedly had concerns of her own. She feared that anything said during the meeting could later be presented as evidence that she, William, or Catherine had pressured Charles against Harry. Palace staff began reviewing the proposal line by line, searching for language that might be interpreted as a threat against the Sussex titles, or as punishment directed toward the children. A hidden struggle then emerged. Charles's team wanted room for future flexibility. William's circle reportedly preferred harder boundaries, fearing that a temporary reconciliation would only create another crisis later. One advisor suggested that Charles send Harry a short, personal message. Others warned that anything written could appear in a memoir, interview, or documentary. The fear of exposure produced the exact coldness Meghan had condemned. No one could speak freely, because every sentence might one day become evidence. Tom Bower's later account allegedly drew strength from people who understood the mood surrounding the visit. His version challenged the harmless family narrative before it could fully settle. Then came the detail that alarmed the palace most. Someone beyond Charles's closest circle already knew the precise length of the meeting. And once the number 47 minutes escaped the palace walls, the question was no longer whether the meeting would become public, but who would reveal its most damaging detail first. Tom Bower's account did more than expose a secret meeting. It transformed 47 private minutes into evidence of a royal struggle over control, memory, and inheritance, forcing both sides to confront a truth they had avoided. Reconciliation had become almost as dangerous as open war. For months, relations between Charles, Harry, and Meghan had been described in careful phrases. Doors were supposedly open. Contact remained possible. family affection survived beneath the tension. Bower's alleged revelation shattered that neutral language by suggesting that behind the public calm, every offer came with boundaries and every conversation carried the risk of betrayal. The story gained force because it was not simply about a disagreement between a king and his daughter-in-law. It involved Archie and Lilibet's future, access to Highgrove, the meaning of royal titles, Diana's legacy, and the conditions attached to any possible return. These were not abstract issues. They touched identity, family memory, and who possessed the power to decide where the Sussex children belonged. Meghan's supporters reportedly saw the encounter as proof that the palace desired obedience rather than healing. From that perspective, Charles had not offered a true reconciliation. He had offered controlled inclusion, with silence and restraint demanded in return. The royal interpretation was entirely different. Charles had allegedly created one final route back into family life. But Meghan rejected protections designed to prevent private trust from being broken again. To his advisors, the conditions were not punishment. They were the minimum price of stability. That contradiction made the revelation explosive. Both sides claimed to be protecting the family, yet they meant opposite things. Meghan viewed protection as security, fairness, independence, and freedom from hostile narratives. The palace viewed it as confidentiality, controlled access, and protection of the crown from further public damage. When the account emerged, Meghan allegedly felt vindicated. The pressure she had faced privately was no longer hidden behind polished language. Harry's response was more conflicted. The story supported his belief that royal access had become conditional, but its exposure also threatened the last remaining chance of speaking privately with his father. For Charles, the damage reached somewhere deeply personal. Highgrove had been a sanctuary, not a negotiating chamber. Once the visit became public controversy, he reportedly grew even more reluctant to hold unrecorded family discussions. William's position hardened. He allegedly saw the disclosure as proof that informal understandings with the Sussexes could eventually enter the public domain. Catherine's concern was quieter, but equally serious. Endless conflict could overshadow duty, charity, ceremonial stability, and the monarchy's transition toward the next generation. The dispute also reopened the question of inheritance. Did royal heritage belong emotionally to the family, or institutionally to the crown? Diana-related possessions captured that divide perfectly. To Harry, they represented a son's connection to his mother. To the palace, they carried legal, historic, and public responsibilities. The deepest damage came from neither the request nor the refusal. It came from the belief that each side intended to weaponize the other's private pain. From then on, Highgrove became the silent measure against which every future attempt at reconciliation would be judged. Yet the deepest consequence was still unfolding, because the failed visit forced Charles to make a choice about the monarchy's future, and that choice would determine whether Harry's children remained inside the royal story or watched it from a distance. The Highgrove meeting ended without an agreement, but its consequences did not remain inside that room. It reshaped Charles's trust, hardened William's boundaries, deepened Harry's anger, and left Meghan facing a final question. Was royal reconciliation ever genuine, or only another form of surrender? From that moment forward, every invitation carried the weight of what had failed at Highgrove. A ceremony was no longer simply a ceremony. A memorial, private visit, or family gathering could reopen questions about security, confidentiality, titles, access, and who possessed the authority to set the terms. Even gestures of peace became dangerous, because neither side trusted what might be demanded in return. Charles allegedly grew more cautious. Private conversations could no longer rely on affection alone. Advisors, written expectations, and clear limits on disclosure became part of the process, turning father and son into figures negotiating across an institutional divide. William's influence continued to expand. As the future king, he reportedly became more involved in deciding how much Sussex participation the monarchy could permit without creating further instability. To Harry, that growing authority deepened his displacement. The crown remained woven into his identity, yet its homes, traditions, and private memories now seemed available only under conditions set by others. Meghan reached an equally painful conclusion, returning without equal respect, reliable protection, and clearly defined independence would not heal the past. It would restore the same imbalance she believed had forced them away. The greatest emotional cost rested with Archie and Lilibet. They inherited royal blood, historic titles, and worldwide attention, but their relationship with the monarchy could be shaped by decisions made before they were old enough to understand the conflict. Charles may have believed he was preserving future possibilities. Harry and Meghan believed he had placed those possibilities behind rules they could never honestly accept. Diana's memory remained the bridge and the wound. For Harry, she represented love, loss, and the part of royal history that belonged to him personally. For the institution, her letters, possessions, and legacy carried public, legal, and historical weight. What connected father and son emotionally also divided them politically. That was the power of the monarchy's forbidden traditions. Residences, archives, jewels, heirlooms, and ceremonial access were never merely possessions. They became instruments through which private pain was transformed into institutional power. There was no public confrontation when Meghan left Highgrove. She departed. Charles remained. The monarchy continued presenting calmness, while the consequences moved silently through the family. The final irony was brutal. A meeting intended to prevent further public damage became one of the clearest symbols of why trust had collapsed. Charles secured neither silence nor controlled cooperation. Meghan gained neither unconditional access nor the protection and recognition she sought. Harry was left with the final choice: accept the boundaries his father had established, challenge them again, or wait for a future reign that might tighten those rules even further. Highgrove was meant to represent roots, continuity, and family. Instead, it became the place where Meghan and Charles allegedly discovered that love, loyalty, inheritance, and royal duty no longer meant the same thing to either of them. Because behind the hedges of Highgrove, 47 minutes did not repair a broken family, they revealed how far apart its most powerful figures had already become, and how much the monarchy might still lose before the final truth is told.